In international politics, certain places suddenly move from the margins of global attention to its very center. Greenland is one such place. For decades, Greenland was rarely discussed outside academic circles, military planning rooms, or climate research institutions. It was perceived as remote, frozen, and politically stable, a territory with little relevance to everyday geopolitics. That perception has now fundamentally changed. President Donald Trump's renewed focus on Greenland during the World Economic Forum in Switzerland did not emerge in isolation. It is the result of long-term structural shifts in global power, climate dynamics, and strategic competition. What appears today as a diplomatic dispute between the United States and Europe is, in reality, a visible symptom of a deeper transformation in how the world organizes power. This chapter begins with a simple but critical question. Why has Greenland become strategically important now? And why are global powers paying attention at this moment in history? Geography has always shaped power. In classical geopolitics, thinkers such as Halford Mackinder and Nicholas Spykman argued that control of key geographic regions could determine the balance of global power. Greenland fits precisely into this logic. Located between North America and Europe, Greenland occupies a position that military strategists describe as a geopolitical bridge. It sits along the shortest air and missile routes between major powers. During the Cold War, this made Greenland indispensable to U.S. early warning radar systems designed to detect Soviet missile launches. Even after the Cold War ended, the island never lost its strategic relevance. It simply faded from public discussion while remaining firmly embedded in military planning frameworks. Today, as global competition intensifies, geography is once again asserting itself. Greenland's position allows for surveillance of Arctic and North Atlantic airspace, monitoring of submarine routes, projection of power across the Arctic corridor. In geopolitics, geography never disappears. It only waits. One of the most underestimated drivers of Greenland's rising importance is climate change. As Arctic ice melts at unprecedented rates, previously inaccessible regions are opening. Shipping routes that were once theoretical are becoming operational. Natural resources buried beneath ice are becoming economically viable. This is not speculation. It is a measurable transformation. For global powers, climate change is not only an environmental issue, it is a strategic one. The Arctic is transforming from a frozen buffer zone into an active arena of competition. Greenland sits at the heart of this transformation. The implications are far-reaching. Shorter shipping routes between Asia, Europe, and North America, increased competition over rare earth minerals, new security challenges as military presence expands. In this context, Greenland is no longer peripheral. It is central. The United States has never forgotten Greenland. While public attention faded after the Cold War, U.S. defense institutions continued to view Greenland as a strategic asset. Thule Air Base, now known as Pituffik Space Base, remains a critical component of America's missile defense and space surveillance infrastructure. From Washington's perspective, Greenland represents continuity. It is part of a long-term strategic map that predates any single administration. President Trump's rhetoric may appear sudden, but the underlying logic is deeply institutional. What has changed is not American interest, but American urgency. As rival powers expand Arctic capabilities, U.S. strategists increasingly view inaction as risk. Influence gaps once tolerated are now seen as vulnerabilities. For Europe, Greenland represents something very different. Greenland is a self-governing territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. Its political status is tied to principles of sovereignty, self-determination, and international law, principles that form the foundation of the European political order. European resistance to U.S. pressure is not only strategic, it is philosophical. If sovereignty can be negotiated through economic or political pressure, then the post-World War II system itself is weakened. This concern explains why European leaders reacted strongly even when U.S. rhetoric stopped short of formal action. To Europe, Greenland is a test case, not just a territory. One of the most important but often overlooked elements of this story is Greenland itself. Historically, discussions about Greenland were conducted over the heads of its population. That is no longer the case. Greenlandic leaders are increasingly assertive, emphasizing that decisions about the island's future must include its people. This shift complicates the geopolitical equation. Greenland is no longer a passive object of strategy. It is an emerging political actor navigating between major powers while pursuing greater autonomy and economic development. Any future arrangement, whether cooperative or confrontational, must account for this reality. President Trump's decision to address Greenland-related issues during the World Economic Forum was not accidental. Davos is not a negotiating table in the traditional sense. It is a signaling platform. Messages delivered there are aimed not only at immediate counterparts, but at markets, allies, rivals, and domestic audiences. By softening tariff threats in Switzerland, the U.S. signaled flexibility. But by maintaining strategic language around Greenland, it also signaled resolve. In geopolitics, tone matters, and Davos amplifies tone. At this stage of the analysis, one conclusion is clear. The Greenland issue is not about a single policy decision or diplomatic exchange. It is about the reemergence of strategic geography in a world defined by climate change, competition, and shifting alliances. In the next part of Chapter 1, we will examine how economic leverage became a geopolitical tool, why tariffs entered the Greenland discussion, and how alliance politics are being quietly reshaped. Unlike earlier eras, contemporary power is rarely imposed through direct confrontation. Instead, it is applied through layered strategies, economic signals, diplomatic pressure, alliance management, and public messaging. The Greenland issue provides a clear case study of this modern approach. The discussion is no longer limited to territory or defense. It now includes tariffs, investment frameworks, supply chains, and public narratives, all operating simultaneously. This is geopolitics by design, not accident. One of the defining features of modern geopolitics is the fusion of economics and security. Tariffs, trade restrictions, and market access are no longer merely economic instruments. They are strategic signals. When tariff threats entered the Greenland discussion, they were not random or impulsive. They were a deliberate escalation within a controlled framework. Economic leverage serves several purposes at once. It applies pressure without military risk. It sends a message to allies and rivals. It shapes domestic political narratives. In this sense, tariffs function less as punishment and more as communication. From an analytical standpoint, the introduction of tariff threats followed a predictable pattern. First, the issue is elevated from technical discussions to public discourse. Second, economic consequences are mentioned to signal seriousness. Third, negotiations are offered as an alternative path. This sequence allows policymakers to test reactions without committing to irreversible action. The pause in tariff threats following discussions in Switzerland should therefore be seen not as a reversal, but as a tactical pause, a recalibration based on response. Markets responded positively because uncertainty was reduced, not because the underlying dispute disappeared. Another critical element of this episode is the role of public diplomacy. In previous decades, sensitive negotiations were conducted almost entirely behind closed doors. Today, public statements are part of the negotiation itself. By discussing Greenland-related issues at a global forum like Davos, the U.S. ensured that European leaders heard the message directly. Global investors took notice, rival powers assessed alliance cohesion, public forums amplify strategic intent. However, this approach carries risk. Public signaling reduces flexibility. Once positions are stated openly, retreat becomes politically costly. This tension explains the careful balance observed in Switzerland. Softened economic language paired with firm strategic framing. Europe's response to the Greenland issue reflects its broader strategic challenge in the 21st century. On one hand, European states depend heavily on transatlantic security cooperation. On the other, they seek to preserve autonomy and legal norms. This creates a dilemma. Too much resistance risks alliance friction. Too much accommodation risks precedent. European leaders therefore adopted a dual-track approach. Publicly reaffirm sovereignty and law, privately maintain dialogue and de-escalation. This is not weakness. It is strategic caution. One of the most significant implications of this episode is what it reveals about alliance dynamics. Alliances today are no longer purely values-based. They increasingly involve transactional elements, burden sharing, access, and reciprocal commitments. The Greenland discussion reflects this shift. From Washington's perspective, long-standing security commitments justify strategic expectations. From Europe's perspective, alliances must remain voluntary and rule-based. This tension is not new, but it is becoming more visible. NATO occupies an uncomfortable position in this debate. While Greenland is strategically relevant to NATO's northern defenses, its political status lies outside NATO's formal mandate. This creates ambiguity. The involvement of NATO leadership in discussions signals an attempt to re-anchor the issue within alliance frameworks, reduce bilateral tension, maintain institutional relevance. However, institutions can only manage disputes. They cannot eliminate competing interests. At the heart of the Greenland issue lies a deeper contrast in strategic culture. The United States increasingly operates under a sense of urgency. Rapid global shifts, technological competition, and perceived influence gaps drive proactive behavior. Europe, by contrast, favors strategic patience. Stability, gradual consensus, and institutional continuity remain core principles. Neither approach is inherently right or wrong, but when they collide, friction is inevitable. Greenland is one such collision point. No geopolitical episode occurs in isolation. While U.S. and European leaders debated Greenland, rival powers were watching closely. Public disagreements among allies provide insight into alliance cohesion and decision-making processes. This does not mean the alliance is weakening, but it does mean it is being tested. Strategic competitors benefit from uncertainty. Unity reduces their room for maneuver. This reality adds urgency to managing disagreements carefully. At first glance, the Greenland discussion may appear to be a temporary diplomatic friction, another headline that will eventually fade. But when examined closely, it represents something far more significant. This moment reveals how global power is evolving. Territory today is no longer valued solely for land or population. Instead, its importance is tied to data routes, climate access, military positioning, and control over future resources. Greenland sits at the intersection of all these factors. What makes this episode historic is not what has happened yet, but what it signals about the next decade. Climate change is transforming the Arctic from a frozen barrier into a strategic corridor. Melting ice is opening, new shipping routes, access to rare minerals, opportunities for military positioning. As a result, the Arctic is shifting from a peripheral region to a central arena of competition. Greenland is not an isolated case. It is part of a broader pattern that includes increased Arctic activity by multiple global powers. The difference is that Greenland lies within a long-standing alliance framework, making every move more politically sensitive. Future tensions are therefore more likely to be managed through negotiation rather than confrontation. But they will not disappear. The most stable and likely short-term scenario is managed cooperation. In this model, the U.S. continues to expand strategic presence through agreements, not ownership. Europe maintains legal sovereignty while allowing increased defense collaboration. Economic incentives replace coercive measures. This outcome preserves alliance unity while adapting to new realities. From a policy perspective, this scenario minimizes risk and maintains predictability, something markets and institutions strongly favor. A second, more complex scenario involves internal competition among allies. Here, disagreements do not break alliances but reshape them. Negotiations become tougher. Expectations become more explicit. Cooperation becomes conditional. This does not signal collapse. It signals evolution. Alliances formed during the Cold War were built on shared threat perception. Modern alliances must also manage economic competition, technological rivalry, and public opinion. Greenland fits directly into this evolving structure. The least desirable but still possible scenario involves external pressure accelerating internal tensions. If rival powers increase Arctic engagement aggressively, alliance disagreements could intensify. Strategic urgency may override diplomatic caution. However, even in this scenario, escalation would most likely remain indirect, through investment competition, infrastructure projects, and diplomatic positioning rather than open conflict. This reflects the broader trend of 21st century geopolitics, competition below the threshold of war. The Greenland episode underscores a key reality. U.S.-Europe relations are not weakening. They are becoming more honest. Disagreements are now more visible because stakes are higher and communication is more public. Transparency creates friction, but it also prevents misunderstanding. In the long run, this may strengthen the relationship rather than undermine it. Healthy alliances adapt. Static alliances fracture. One of the clearest lessons from this situation is the importance of leadership tone. Firm messaging combined with diplomatic restraint reduces escalation risk. Emotional or absolutist language increases it. The discussions in Switzerland suggest that leaders on both sides recognize this balance. Economic tools were discussed, but dialogue remained open. This approach is likely to define future crisis management. Global markets react not to headlines alone, but to predictability. The calming of economic rhetoric following diplomatic engagement reduced uncertainty. This response highlights how closely financial systems are tied to geopolitical stability. Media coverage may focus on controversy, but policy outcomes often depend on quiet negotiations rather than public drama. Understanding this distinction is crucial for informed analysis. From a long-term analytical perspective, Greenland will remain strategically important, but it will not be resolved through dramatic action. Instead, we should expect gradual expansion of strategic cooperation, ongoing negotiations behind the scenes, periodic public tension followed by de-escalation. This is not indecision. It is strategic patience on both sides. The future of geopolitics belongs to those who manage complexity, not those who rush decisions. The Greenland discussion is a reminder that global politics today is subtle, layered, and interconnected. Territory, economics, alliances, and public perception all interact in ways that demand careful analysis. Rather than seeing this as a conflict, it should be understood as a signal, a preview of how power will be negotiated in the decades ahead. And in that sense, this story is not ending. It is just beginning.